Okay, Arthur, you there?
And Andrew, do we have the slideshow up?
It is up. Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone. The last count we had showed about 55% of the attendees are in the transit industry, mostly on properties, some consultants, and I see that quite a few of my friends are among that group. So thank you all. This has been an issue. I'm sorry, Andrew? Okay, thank you. Hiring, retaining people, the driver shortage has been a national issue for long before COVID. It seems to me that it was about 10 years ago, I had a discussion with the superintendent of transportation in Northern Kentucky at Tank, and he said at the time they had only a handful of people with more than 5 years of seniority that were filling work with mandatory overtime. So the issue has become even more critical since COVID. And I'm going to quote one of my friends who's a transit CEO, and he said, "This is a critical, obligatory, imperative subject that should be on the top of the bucket list for all of the transit industry." So the transit people that are online now have been living with this for a long time, have been living with it more dramatically more recently. We also have a lot of people with university addresses, and that's why I wanted to describe just what the problem is. What we're going to talk about tonight is on-time performance, but couched in terms of operators. The 5 musts for on-time performance: adequate and accurate running time, recovery time, enough operators, obviously enough buses, enough trained and enabled supervisors. My thoughts tonight are going to address 4 out of the 5 because they all involve operators one way or another. So one of the first questions is, why do people leave? We see a lot of turnover in the transit industry, just as we see a lot of turnover in other industries. The television news this morning said that the Department of Labor's numbers for September were that 16% of the workforce in September, the general workforce, left employment to seek other options. They also mentioned that during the COVID era, many senior people were given the opportunity for buyout, early retirement, and I think we're going to see that later when I get into some of the numbers. But what are some of the things that cause drivers to leave? Let's call those pain points. This is not, by the way, a result of a study. This is a result of 52 years and a lot of gray hair and being in a lot of cities, knowing a lot of drivers, and studying operations. So what is a frustration for a bus driver that starts to make you think you'd rather go do something else? Maybe I'd rather work at 7-Eleven. Maybe I'd rather work at Walmart. So one of the issues we just mentioned, inaccurate running times. We're always rushing. Well, now we have safety issues. Safety issues can lead to discipline. We have red light violations, and those are an issue not only from a safety perspective, from job retention perspective, but also with the legal system. You know, the rush can also lead to passenger falls. I will say that one of the systems I will be mentioning later on is a system I've studied, and I have ridden through more red traffic signals riding buses there than I have anywhere else. Scheduling being one of the issues. Inadequate recovery time. Some managers think that recovery is a cost. Recovery is a necessity. So some of the other pain points: management support or perhaps non-support. The supervisors are police instead of helpers, instead of coaches. One transit system general manager who came up through the ranks told me that when he first became a supervisor, his trainers taught him where to hide to catch drivers, and that was about all he learned. And through lack of training and education with supervisors, sometimes they don't see themselves, they don't learn how to be a coach, they don't learn how to support and help. And sometimes that's a perception, and you're going to see some examples of that later on. Other pain points: lack of appreciation. I'm just another number. I'm just another driver. I'm a number on the seniority list. Well, you know, we'll talk about this a little bit, but perhaps you can alleviate that with senior management being out in the field at odd hours. Some general managers that I know, you know, make it a habit to get out on Sunday afternoon, get out in the evening, you know, swing by at odd hours just to show the face and see what's going on, see how everybody is doing. And one of the ideas that I think may help is getting the family involved in some situations. And you're going to see some ideas there later. So another frustration is scheduling issues. In my on-time performance work, I have seen this in many cities where the policy is a clock face headway, you know, a bus every 60 minutes, a bus every 30 minutes. And quite often that has resulted in trying to put 4 pounds of sugar in a 3-pound bag. It's valid on paper, it's not valid on the street. One system in the southeast part of the country, after riding all of their routes with a stopwatch, determined that their schedules were based on a 60-minute clock face headway, with buses meeting every 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the route. In actuality, they were putting too much sugar in the small bag. However, if they had moved to a 70 and 35, at least as a stopgap, it might be possible. Why is this in here? Yes, it's OTP, but it's an operator frustration. It's an operator frustration from many perspectives. Another operator frustration is too many time points. Now, this may be difficult to see on the screen. By the way, these are all anonymized. I suspect no one is going to be able to determine what city this is, because it's listed as time point 1, time point 2, and so on. Let me assure you that this is a real schedule. And while the small screen may not display it well, this is a route that has a 1-hour cycle time with 21 time points. Time points 1 and 2 and 3 minutes apart. I will tell you that in trailing buses on this route, buses were early past many of the early time points along the route. The drivers knew they needed the time later. We all know that running early is a problem. Running early can lead to operator discipline. Here, the operators pretty much had no choice. So while this is an on-time performance issue, it is also a source of operator frustration. So the top of the screen shows the 21 time points. The bottom of the screen shows that route reconfigured with a total of 6 time points, 3 outbound, 3 inbound. Good practice for locating time points is about every 10 minutes. Over a 10-minute span, an operator can adjust how he or she is driving with the right foot. Over 1 and 2 and 3 minute span, there's nothing the driver can do, again, leading to frustration. Frustration is a big reason people leave employment. So more issues. Driver assistance devices. This may not come to mind immediately, but the photo on the left is a service, and this one I can identify for you. This is the DC Circulator, which is a group of, I believe, 6 bus routes. Every route has a bus every 10 minutes. To the public, they just want to see a bus every 10 minutes, not at specific times. However, if you look at the graphic on the left, that's a device visible to the bus driver, which shows that this driver is on time. However, this driver is 6 minutes behind his leader and 15 minutes ahead of his follower. Well, you know, as the thing as a bus driver, that's awfully frustrating because I don't know from this display what I'm supposed to do. The right thing to do for passenger would be to drag, slow down, let the leader get a little further ahead, and let the follower catch up. We even out the passenger load. But then I may be disciplined because I'm not running on time. I will say in this that the reason a schedule is needed on something like that is to have drivers at the correct place when it's time for their meal relief in some cities or shift relief in the case of Washington, D.C. I'll go into OTP a little bit on this too. With frequent service like that, the issue is not whether the bus is on time, it's whether the spacing is maintained. The bus is supposed to be there every 10 minutes. If all buses are 10 minutes late, then as far as the passengers are concerned, everything is on time, OTP is 100%. However, it's possible that as the computer reports it, if every bus is 10 minutes late, on-time performance is 0. So again, those can lead to driver frustrations. Restrooms are a big issue. The graphic on the right shows a wreck that happened because the driver had to stop to use the restroom in the middle of the bus route. That particular bus stop frequently has buses parked to use the restroom at the McDonald's, which is just over the photographer's left shoulder. The issue with this, and something that will make one think, is the end of the line is about 1.5 miles away in the direction the bus is pointing at a light rail station. When the light rail stations were built, even though many of them would be the end of the line, there were no operator restrooms built for bus drivers because they're not the end of the line for the rail station. Restrooms can be quite a frustration. So let's think about some low-hanging fruit and some of the ways that we can address some of these issues as managers. Trying to develop personal relationships. I have been fortunate to be general manager on small and mid-sized properties where I had the opportunity to know everybody. And they had the opportunity to know me, you know, like it or not. But those personal relationships, I think, are extremely important. If you're not having a personal relationship as a manager, then the operators are relying on what they hear in the driver's room, which may or may not be entirely accurate. I was on a property recently where this was a discussion, and the senior drivers were discouraging new drivers, young drivers, from staying as employees because they were talking about how bad the work was. No one ever asked the question of these senior drivers who had been there 20 years, you know, if it's so bad, why are you still here? Why did you stay that long? But you have the discussions in the club room that may contain some inaccuracies. So one thought is to appoint a mentor for each new operator, someone with whom they can develop that personal relationship at their level. You know, maybe a mid-seniority operator who has been through that introductory period but now has better work. But the other thought there is not somebody in a supervisory role, but somebody at the same level, someone who's gone before. The importance is that we want knowledge, facts, rather than gossip, rumor, and urban legend. Now, so the company, we can also look at developing personal relationships, as I just mentioned, You know, people like the general manager, assistant general manager, superintendent of operations. It's good practice to get to know people and to let them get to know you. You're trying to build a team. And with new hires, with new people, that team building can be difficult. One technique you can have is ride with the new operators. Yeah, once they've turned in, ride with them in a couple of weeks, ride with them in a month or two, ride with them in 6 months. One of the points is to meet them where they are, nights, weekends, to show that you as a manager are out at the same times and understand what's going on. It's a listening session. You're there to hear what is going on with new operators, what issues they may be having in an informal setting. So be ready to answer questions. You're trying to build a team. So one of the ideas for some managers, perhaps if you did not come up through the ranks, pick 3 episodes of the show Undercover Boss and watch them. You may see managers, CEOs of corporations, when handed a broom, they're not entirely sure which end to use. Then you'll see others who can do the job because they've done the job. When you understand and can do the job, or at least have a full understanding, you earn more respect. So, dealing with scheduling issues, again, one of the pain points we discussed, unsustainable schedules. Well, we also have a pain point with the run, cut, and roster, the driver work schedules, whether that's the day or the week. Another pain point which perhaps managers don't entirely consider is conflicts with personal and family needs. The nature of the workforce has changed since I entered the workforce. Personal and family needs have a higher priority to many, many people. That is one of the short-term concerns where payroll, pension, all of the other long-term fringe benefits, you don't see those on a day-to-day basis. Missing the son's baseball game, the daughter's soccer game, those are things that you see on a daily basis. Remember, we're talking about why people leave and some of the things that perhaps we can do about it, some of the ideas. Get back into OTP for a minute. Number one must for on-time performance is having adequate and accurate running times. When I wrote the on-time performance book, I did put some research into it. And between 95 and 2017, transit bus revenue speeds, according to the National Transit Database nationwide, declined by 8.4%. One of the things that says is that in those cities that did decline, remember these are national averages, schedules need to be adjusted. Things change over time. I live in the Dallas, Texas area. The Southwest has seen dramatic growth in population, and we have numerous people moving in faster than new streets can be built. Congestion has only increased, slowed down by COVID, but without COVID, congestion has only increased, slowing all traffic, including buses. One of our people who is likely to be on tonight has more experience in using automatic vehicle location data in terms of dealing with running times. But as a brief mention, as you're using data, use the number that appears the most often. That's most representative of drivers. My point, however, I'm old school, is that whatever data you collect from a computer, whatever you analyze mathematically, you have to get out and ride and see what is really happening on the street. Automatic vehicle location data will not show excessive running times unless you really dig into some mathematical modeling. It won't show if drivers are building in a short break in that route segment because there's a convenience store there. Automatic vehicle location data may also show that the bus is on time over that route segment. However, when you're riding the bus, if you see a lot of fear in the eyes of passengers, if you're holding on for dear life, then what you have is a very good bus driver who can keep the bus on time, but not operate smoothly, maybe press some yellow lights, some red lights, and take chances because the schedule overwhelms safety. So one of your major assets here is using operator knowledge. In my experience, a suggestion box doesn't work. I've seen properties where they say we have a suggestion box in each of our garages. The suggestions go to the garage superintendent, and if the garage superintendent so chooses, those may get to the person who can do something about them. Many of the drivers I have known over the decades are not prolific writers, but they'll sit down and talk with you at any time. So if you spend time in the driver's room, maybe one day a month, that gets back to our morale discussion. How do you get drivers there? Bring the food, so bring the donuts and be there to listen. Again, we're talking about team building. Yeah, the main focus of this is sort of an excerpt from the on-time performance workshop I do. As Andrew said, it's pulled some elements from the scheduling course and from the books that I've written to focus on the retention and recruitment issue, but with an OTP flair. Recovery time is necessary. The old industry standard, 10%, about 6 minutes out of every hour, has pretty much been superseded by the new informal standard of 15%, about 9 minutes out of every hour. And over the course of time, a couple of things have influenced that. Wheelchair lifts, the ability to get mobility assistance devices on and off the bus, and bicycle racks. Now, it's one thing for a gray hair to say that we need 9 minutes per every hour. Average, we need decent recovery time, whatever that is. It's not a hard and fast number. But sometimes we have to explain and justify that. This paper was published by the University of Southern California. They did a statistical analysis of the Los Angeles MTA, and we know it was done by university and not transit people because they call it slack time rather than recovery or layover. They used more variables than I have ever seen in anything. While I took statistics in college, they used more Greek letter variables than I thought existed. The answer they came up with is 15% is about right. So that gives us something else. Inadequate recovery time is another reason that drivers leave. By the way, what's one of the things that drivers do during that recovery time? If there's a restroom available, that's when they use the restroom. If they're on properties that do not have a lunch break, then that's the chance to have half a sandwich one trip. So one of the pain points I mentioned is work schedules, run cutting and rostering. And old heads in this industry, those of us that have been around for a long time, tend to think that's just the way it is. That's the industry. There's nothing we can do about it. Well, maybe there is. If we want to look at an option, traditionally all of the mud, and you can substitute whatever word you want for mud, but all of the mud was piled together, and we knew that it would be picked by junior operators because operators with any seniority would not work that. And you'll see some examples of mud here shortly. That really doesn't work out very good today because people do not stay long enough. New hires do not stay long enough to get to the point where they have a little better work. So if we're looking at options, strongly suggest at the very top of the screen, we honor long-term seniority. No operator moves backward in their quality of work. Traditionally, we have had operators 10, 15, maybe even more years before they got a weekend off. We sure don't want operators like that to move backward. But one thing we can do is look at where on the seniority list we can start to change that concept. So once we honor long-term seniority, maybe the top third, the top half of the list, maybe even the top 2/3 of the seniority list, gives us the bottom third, the bottom half of the seniority list to play with on how we can make that work better for those junior people. Most properties that I have been on find that their turnover is extremely high amongst new hires. Therefore, that's where the cost is. So here's some examples of bad work, sweet and sour. Night work is bad, but working a straight shift is good. So if we have night work, we try to make that work straight. We have some routes that none of us would like to drive. Now, whether that is a tough schedule that really cannot be addressed, whether it's tough turns, tough streets. Yeah, I really haven't mentioned passenger interactions. Not too much we can do about that, but we know passenger interactions are an issue. So if you have something that is difficult, then there are some easy days where they're on other routes that are rather pleasant. Interlining. You interline a tight bus route with a looser bus route for schedule maintenance. Well, that also gives the driver a chance to breathe. Sweet and sour. People generally don't want to work weekends, but if you make the weekend work all straight, and then you try to roster that with consecutive days off, well, now not everybody is full of pain. They get some good, some bad. If you have to work splits, I don't know what our industry is going to look like post-COVID. The most recent number I've seen is that ridership is back to 70% of pre-COVID ridership. But what we have seen, based on the news, is as people return to work, as people return to their offices, it seems like our old peak to base ratio may not stay with a high peak to base ratio as people work part days in the office, part days at home, or they work flexible hours. So we may see a reduction in splits in some cities, but if we have splits, we try to roster those so they're off Saturday and Sunday. Those are the sweet and sour examples. 4-day work weeks. 4-day work weeks can be very popular. They work 4 days a week and they have 3 days off. 4 10-hour days, 40 hours, they have 3 days off. From a company perspective, that operator is now available for a day off work. It's much easier to ask somebody to work one of their 3 off days. They still have 2 days off. They work one of their 3 off days, generally at overtime rate, rather than have somebody who only has 2 days off and asking them to work one of those. So they're working a 6-day week and they only have 1 day of rest. And with family obligations, a day of rest may not really be a day of rest. One way that you can do this as well that helps the company in several ways is do the 4-day work week, where the 4-day drivers cover all of your Saturday and Sunday shifts. You see this pattern here. We have 5 drivers work Sunday, 5 drivers work Saturday, and each of those drivers has 2 weekdays. It uses 2 pieces of work on Monday, 2 on Tuesday and Wednesday, and so on. One of the other benefits of this is now we have more drivers who work Monday to Friday who can have Saturday and Sunday off. Do we have too much service at odd hours? Do we have too much service at night? Are we running unnecessarily requiring drivers? I was on a system a while back that was going to a demand response system after a certain hour in the evening, still using buses. They were reconfiguring the routes and they had a lower requirement for the number of drivers, possibly a separate network, possibly changing to some kind of flex route in the evening. Do we have too much weekend service? Now, at the bottom in the yellow is the question of how creative can we be? A couple of weeks ago, I did this presentation at a transit summit on the East Coast. And one person in the audience asked the question of another speaker, why have transit managers not been ahead of this issue? The speaker, who has many decades in the industry, said that, well, sometimes the manager's just a little lazy and they don't want to get out of their comfort zone. I suggested that a more polite way to mention this is management inertia. Getting creative also requires some risk, working with the union. But one person I was talking with recently is studying this, and he was looking at a 2 to 3 week roster rotation for low seniority drivers, so that perhaps one driver on week 1 will work through a weekend. Driver B has at least one of those weekend days off. The following week they switch, so that now driver A has a day off on a weekend, 1 or 2 days, and they cycle through. He was talking about some systems in Europe doing this type of thing. For further information, and by the way, I will say, I mentioned the Transit Authority in Northern Kentucky earlier. Many years ago, Tank told me that they were doing this with their 4-day work weeks. They had a 3-week cycle on a rotary roster where every driver would get, I believe it was 6 consecutive days off at the end of their 3-week cycle. For more information on that, I will refer you to someone who I believe may be on tonight. His name is Michel Corval, and he's with the company CSCHED, CSCHED. And if he's upset that I mentioned his name, he'll tell me later. But he's impressed me with the work and the research he's done So that may be a resource for the people that are attending. Moving on to a slightly different question. We want to think of what the real cost of turnover is. Now, the number that I hear the most often is it costs $5,000 to hire and train a bus driver. Let's consider that maybe sort of an average, some systems more, some systems less. Every time someone leaves, we have to hire and train a replacement driver. Let's focus in, instead of turnover, on the thing that we can address: voluntary quits. Remember what I said earlier, Bureau of Labor Statistics said in September, 16% of the workforce in general left. So let's think about doing a cost analysis. Let's not just say that's a fact of life. Let's determine what it costs for those people who leave and see if there's a better way to invest that money. So we do a detailed analysis. Retirements and terminations are not part of this discussion. That's not something we can really control. If someone retires, we sure can't control that. If someone is being terminated, we want to control that because they're being terminated for a reason. But do a detailed analysis, not a broad brush. So we don't include salaried staff time that we would spend anyways. My example is car dealership document fees. When you buy a new car dealers want you to pay some number of dollars to process the paperwork. The paperwork's being processed by people they have on staff getting paid anyways. We're just subsidizing their payroll as car purchases. But do a detailed analysis. What is it costing you when drivers quit? We cannot quantify the human cost. But for those of us who have one way or another left a job, or in my case as a consultant, there have been a couple of places where I decided I'm not going back there. It's not worth the hassle. Thank you very much. You know, there is still a human cost. We can't quantify it, but let's think about that as morally responsible managers. Those people, before they leave, may have some sleepless nights. They may and perhaps should have a lot of family discussion. So once we do our cost analysis, we can determine the dollar value of reducing voluntary quits. How much would you save if you could reduce voluntary quits by 5% or by 10% a year? Once we have that dollar value, we should have a number that we can think about investing to reduce that turnover, reduce that other expense. If the horse of investment, though, comes before the cart of savings, we cannot prove this will happen, which is why it requires courage. And risk comes before reward. But as logical managers, what do we think we can invest? What ideas do we think we can sell to the board, sell to the city council with a logical expectation of return on investment? If we don't change the way we do business, I believe that the downward spiral will only continue. There's a large property who was in the transit newsletter emails yesterday. About 1,600 vacancies. About 500 of them are critical. One of the main quotes is, attrition outpaces hires. They have had service cuts, lack of operators. Now, in this particular case, the training is 8 weeks at $17 an hour, and this is a major city, so I would suggest 17 an hour is not a good wage. In this particular slide is the reason I'm going to mention their policy is then, once those drivers turn in, they turn in as part-time drivers working 30 hours a week at $22 an hour. So what that means statistically is they have to hire 4 drivers at part-time, 30 hours a week, to do the job of 3 full-time drivers. I do not know why their policy is that people turn in and work part-time for a period of time, even though they seem to have full-time openings. There may be reasons. Maybe many reasons. I don't know, but all I know is what the numbers tell me. So my question in a circumstance like that, if that is just a historic policy, is would they be better to have those drivers turn in and work full-time and bring home a full paycheck much earlier than they do? Would that reduce their turnover at the low end of the seniority list with new hires? Traditional, we've seen lately longevity pay. Yeah, you've been here a year, you've been here 2 years, whatever, we'll pay you at the end of that period. Well, that's essentially, the line, I shall gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. And many of us who have, wasted our childhoods will know that quote comes from Wimpy in the Popeye cartoon. But it's deferred gratification. Postponed or incremental hiring bonus. One of the points that we need to be aware of with current employees, instant gratification takes too long. Delayed gratification means people leave. So maybe a recruitment bonus. There was a property in the media within the last 2 or 3 weeks, signed a new contract offering night and weekend premium pay. And maybe there are some other ideas. That section was talking about retention. We're going to move on to recruitment and thoughts regarding recruitment. A newsletter came out recently, a mid-sized system, about 55 buses peak, was going to hold a job fair at their transit center on a Saturday. Is that good enough? Well, maybe not.
Just give me 1 second and I will be out of this.
Okay. This is a national problem. We have no magic bullet. Here's one of the points, though. We're competing now with transportation network companies, Amazon, trucking, logistics, and especially in many cities. Amazon has been building warehouse and spending more money on payroll and fringe benefits than we're spending for bus drivers. So much of our competition has better quality of work. On enough operators, this is a point too, I'm coming from the scheduling class, intelligent use of scheduled overtime. Once we get to full employment, the question is how many drivers do we need? I have dealt with many general managers and many transit management companies that believe overtime is evil. Again, I'm going to suggest to do an analysis. We have a choice. If we have 440 hours worth of 440 hours worth of work to cover in a week, we can use 11 drivers and not pay any overtime. Or we can use 10 drivers and pay them overtime. I don't know how well you're able to see this table. It's actually an Excel sheet that I distribute in the class. But what the point is missed on the overtime issue. The no overtime option requires hiring an additional driver and paying fringe benefits. So what's health insurance cost for a driver on number 11 these days? And I think we can do an analysis that says that fewer drivers working scheduled overtime, 44, 45, 46 hours a week, doesn't bother me at all, becomes effective, efficient. And by the way, we get some side benefits because now they're taking home more in their paycheck. If they miss a day, they lose their overtime. By taking something more home in the paycheck each week, absenteeism and turnover should decrease. The reason this slide is in here is, I still hear that our big issue is people don't want to work. Occasionally, I will still hear people thinking of the COVID era where people were sitting at home collecting large unemployment benefits. And there are people who still think that, well, they're still staying at home paying unemployment. That's why we don't have enough restaurant workers. That's why my grocery store normally has only 2 checkout lanes open when they used to have 3 or 4 or 5. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.gov is their website, will give you some very good information, and we have to back up everything we're doing with numbers. So I would suggest that you analyze some of the BLS statistics. If we look at June 2019, pre-COVID, the US population was 257 million. Out of that, because child labor is not a good thing, the workforce, people of working age and up, was 162 million. A number that I do not fully understand is the workforce participation rate that says out of the workforce 3 years ago, only 62.9% of the workforce was actually working. What I suspect is that those are counted as certain types of jobs, people who are semi-retired, people who are out on their own in the gig economy may not be included. But bottom line is in 2019, we had 102,000 people available to work, 102 million people available to work. Unemployment was 3.7%. June 22, arguably post-COVID, the workforce participation rate was down a little bit. Again, we talk about early retirements. We had 102 million people. We were only down 500,000 people. Unemployment was 3.6%. The interpretation of those numbers is people are not sitting at home collecting large unemployment checks. Everyone who wants to work is working. Now, recognize unemployment will vary monthly, but overall, the interpretation is they are not out there waiting for us to open up bus driver jobs for them. So we have to get out and solicit. We have to address barriers to entry. Let's look at recruiting non-traditional. Athens, Georgia hires bus drivers at age 18. Tampa, Florida was going to experiment with that. This is pre-COVID. And the Center for Urban Transit Research was going to do an analysis of their degree of success. Athens, Georgia recruits out of high schools. Let's look at retirees. One of the big things that I think our industry is missing, although recently I read of some work that one of the transit management companies is doing, is refugees. Well, what do we have to do with refugees? Perhaps they need some additional training. English is a second language. Some other things. We need to address daycare needs. Capital Metro in Austin, Texas has had a daycare at their main bus garage for many, many, many years. Well, nowadays it's not just child daycare, but perhaps it's senior daycare as well. we may need to reevaluate our background check standards. With the service reductions we're having, one of the people who I believe is attending tonight is Lori Linscott. She's general manager in Bangor, Maine. Lori had to cut out all Saturday service due to the driver shortage. Well, there's a point where getting people to their grocery store, getting people to wherever they need to be on a Saturday, perhaps will let us think we need to maybe not be quite as picky with drivers. We still need to have good judgment. We talked about improving the quality of work. Well, let's talk about going active recruiting. Yeah, others poach from us. Where's Amazon getting all of its people? They're getting them from other industries. But we need to use language that people on the street can understand. A transit system with which I'm familiar was running bus destination signs that said operators wanted. I don't know what an operator is. That must be an awfully large telephone system. But when the signs say hiring bus drivers, well, now, as a person standing on the street corner, I may have an idea, hey, that's something I never considered. Poaching could be an ethical question, but let's think about targeting the lower income workers. Restaurants, cafeterias, certified nursing assistants. I read recently that certified nursing assistants have an extremely high turnover rate. You know, once they get into that industry, they don't stay very long, but they're most certainly well trained. Hotels and motels. Let me address restaurants and cafeterias for a moment. And I'll add grocery stores. The person who takes care of the produce at the grocery store I go to, his name is Adnan. He works mornings at a Dollar General, afternoons at the grocery store. I have never seen him when he is not working hard. Open, friendly. You know, if I were managing a system here, I'd be trying to recruit him. A Kentucky Fried Chicken, a local hamburger place, people behind the counter that I met for the first time wowed me with their service. My wife and I were at a fast food restaurant last weekend, and I met one of their new people behind the counter. I thought, wow, I know how she could double her income and have a good job, you know, if she were willing to become a bus driver. So non-traditional, maybe a little scary. The United States Department of Labor has grants available. The website is on the screen, dol.gov/grants, for teens and young adults, low-wage workers, women in non-traditional occupations, people with disabilities, veterans, returning service members, and here's one I'm going to mention, previously incarcerated youth or adults, and also tribal and rural communities. An acquaintance of mine who is, let's just say, very familiar with the legal system, and by the way, he's another one that I would hire just from knowing him, told me that Texas has a tax credit for employing parolees. Assuming that's true, I don't know if that's state or federal, but there may be some money available. So if we found some investable money, let's look at meaningful fringes. English as a second language, a GED class, possibly for the employee and the spouse. 529 college fund for kids. 529 is a United States program for investing tax-free money that kids can later use for college. Trying to reward today, not just tomorrow. The main point is recognizable by the family, not just the pay stub. So perhaps one of the things that we need is an honest brochure to hand to people like Adnan at the grocery store, like Luna at the Whataburger is the person I just mentioned. Yeah. Do you want to become a bus driver? Here's what's involved, but it also needs to be an honest brochure. OC Transpo in Ottawa, Canada, I would suggest you Google their bus driver job posting. Their job posting is brutally honest. You're going to be working splits. You're going to be nights. You're going to be working weekends as you are newly hired. It tells people what to expect. I've never seen anyone do this. I don't know how successful it may be, but were I back as a general manager on a small to mid-sized system, I would look at getting the family involved so that the final interview is with the general manager, superintendent of transportation, not just HR. Yeah, I don't know how well HR does the job on different properties, but the people who need to get the buses on the street have a different vested interest. And possibly those meetings include the spouse so that the spouse knows what to expect. Why is mommy working Saturday? I would like to have her at the soccer game. And emphasizing family related fringes. We have some headwinds. We already mentioned ESL, child and senior care. Lack of personal transportation. How does the bus driver get to work at 4 o'clock in the morning? And some of our new hires will not have their own vehicle. In World War II, systems ran work buses, went around and collected employees. Today we have transportation network companies. Headwinds for the previously incarcerated and other non-traditional. And I'm not talking about being Dudley do-right, but if there's a valid business case, we have to be very selective. I learned recently that a system is hiring mechanics out of the prison system in that state because while they're in prison, they are learning diesel mechanics. We have a national mechanic shortage too, and that's great. What do we need to do? Get the local assets involved, district attorney, parole and probation, the people that understand that group of individuals better than I do, certainly as a transit manager. Maybe the clergy. Include the previously incarcerated in the program development. We need to be concerned about confidentiality. We've got to get out in front of the story with the media and the editorial boards of the media and also with existing employees. I will suggest this. If even 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago, someone suggested to me that I would be discussing hiring people who'd come out of prison to drive a bus, I would have wondered about their sanity. Well, I happen to know some of those folks, some who I'd hire, some who I would not. There are some good functions, good features of considering this. Post-hire but pre-turn-in. Training deficiencies can be an issue on some systems. Trainers may be adept technically, but they're there to get a paycheck. They might even be bad-mouthing the company and the union in class. Even new employees have brains and they start to question things. One property I saw requires them to wear the full driver uniform. I believe it's within their first week of training. And I have seen a new trainee sent home because they weren't in uniform. Their failure rate in training was extremely high, which meant that, let's say 80 to 90% of the people got a free set of clothes because they were not in the end going to become bus drivers. The rest of them would wonder about that. What does that say about the organization? Early in the training, maybe a manager wants to have an informal meeting with the trainees. How's it going? Have management training, not just trainers, there when the union gives its pitch. One property, when the union gave its union speech to the class, much of the speech was talking about how bad the company was. They just want to fire you. They want to find reasons to fire you. Well, in truth, the company had just hired them and was short of drivers. So you want to be able to let people know what's going on and allay some of those early fears. Now, one of the assets in hiring, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is modernizing the commercial driver test. That's going to be something worth tracking. Post turn-in, another pain point. Again, voluntary quits, voluntary dropouts. And now we may be talking about terminations. Let's realize that the hardest job for an operator is the extra board. That's where they need to know the most. On most properties, where does a newly trained operator go? To the hardest job on the property, the extra board. So an operator who knows the least is trying to do the job where they're required to have the most knowledge, perhaps set up for failure. So getting into the final section of this evening, I want to be sure we leave time for Q&A. The final section is dealing with supervisors. When we have a bad boss, and I'm sure many people have had bad bosses, define bad however you want. You know, as a consultant, you know, there's a very small number of people in the industry I'm not interested in working with. You know, adios, my friend. I don't need to stay there. The supervisors and dispatchers need to help and guide, recognizing that new operators are especially fragile. I always had a company frequency radio on when I was a manager. I want to hear what's going on the street. One of those things that I want to hear is the response from the dispatchers. And when an operator calls in for help, a dispatcher who responds saying, do the best you can, is not necessarily helping and coaching that driver. My response as an operator, at least what I'm thinking is, I'm already doing the best I can. That's why I just called for help. Now, hopefully this video will play because we had, and let me preface this. I have two videos here. They're available on YouTube. I called the TV station for permission. They referred me to YouTube and YouTube's fair use policy. What I would like you to listen to here is the interaction with the dispatchers and supervisors.
Obtained by the WBRZ investigative unit through a public records request shows the driver noticed a problem.
A check engine light on this bus, and it's not going over 15 miles an hour. Yeah, that's normal.
It was anything but normal. 12 minutes passed and the situation on bus 202 became worse.
Bus 202. I've had real bad fumes coming out the back of this bus. This coming out bad. I'm asking, should I go up here with this bus like this? 24 operators might be polluting the air, but it's not gonna harm anybody.
Drivers we talked to declined to go on camera out of fear of being fired, but all of them say this situation put the public's safety at risk. They say it also exposes a big disconnect between dispatch and the people who are driving the buses. Obtained by the WBRZ. Obtained by the...
That's bus 202. Yes, it polluted the air a little bit.
The most dramatic fire of the year was this one at the Mall of Louisiana, as a CATS bus was engulfed in flames. The most dramatic.
So headwinds on implementation, educating the board and senior management, getting buy-in. Link Transit in Washington State tried to get hiring and retention bonuses through the board. The board rejected the bonuses because their statement was it might contribute to inflation. That resulted in a service cut. I would be remiss if I didn't mention a success story. A success story that's been in the transit media news is Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority in northeastern Massachusetts the administrator, Noah Berger, who I think is on tonight, new administrator. He got in and immediately started to make changes. MVRTA had had a flag stop system for many years under the old administrator. The new administrator is eliminating flag stops in favor of marked bus stops, which is what that system had decades ago. One of the things that he's done is actively recruiting. Brochure, postcard, whatever. By the way, to get these printed, the company Vista Print, available online, postcards, brochures, very cost effective for you. They don't have to cost a lot of money. But actively recruiting, increased pay. He eliminated a requirement for English language fluency, substituting English language adequacy. It told me some people don't consider themselves fluent, but they speak well enough. And by the way, that's important because one of their two cities, only 30% of the population is English as a first language. So we talk about failures. We also talk about some successes. We just need to find more. I'm rather hoping that we see a magazine article on that in the near future, in either Mass Transit or Metro, on some of these successes. Headwinds, labor. The union may have a conflict of interest if they make more money from initiation fees than they do from long-term members. If the executive board is high seniority, they may be concerned about people with low seniority staying long enough to start getting active with the union, jeopardizing their jobs. And again, the apprenticeship type of program, some of these folks would have been there for a long time, took 10, 15 years to get weekends off. A little jealousy about people that don't have to wait that length of time. I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but we should always be aware of possibilities. So again, with labor, a grievance that I remember reading about in the 80s, a company gave out Christmas turkeys. The union grieved it. It was not a transit company. The union grieved it because they had not bargained for Christmas turkeys. The arbitrator upheld the grievance, and that was the last Christmas turkey the employees saw because the union grieved it. You can do side letters of understanding. Maybe you want a trial period. Let the union take credit. Maybe get the international involved. Prepare for some backlash. When we get to full staffing in the industry and overtime is reduced, take-home pay reduces. For long-term drivers, take-home pay reduces. Now it's time to start thinking about retirement or leaving. Monitor the success or failure. Monthly reports, graphing it over time. Pre-exit interviews. When people quit, find out why. Can they be saved? And then use that as feedback for retention. So we do have time for Q&A. Andrew will take over. On the screen now is my contact information. If anyone wants to contact me about either the class, the OTP workshop, my books are available through the website, runcutter.com. And Andrew, I will ask you to take it back and see where we are with Q&A and discussion.
Okay, so Arthur, thank you so much. That really was quite fascinating. I'm impressed by your ability to talk for so long without a break. So at least have a glass of water now. So we have a number of things that came through on the chat. So I'm hoping we get an opportunity to go through those. Let me, you might show if you can see those as well on my screen, but let's just go through these. So right, I'll just take them in order. So one from Michelle first. So regarding the recovery time and the 15% rule of thumb, I disagree that any flat number cannot work for all routes. A route hitting downtown traffic and a rural deep suburban route does not need the same amount of layover. Further, especially in light of the fact that we have trouble hiring drivers, is not time to start talking about layover. which belongs to the schedule to avoid cascading effects and recovery, or excess layover, which is the portion of the actual time between trips that is not a layover. And ends, we lie to the driver, showing layover, which they seldom get, which is certainly not all break time. Is it not time to call things by their names? Okay.
A rose is a rose. We used to call it layover. The industry has shifted to calling it recovery time because the main intent is to keep the buses on time. It's also time that's usable for the driver for things like restroom needs. And we have had guidelines for years. The 1946 scheduling manual published by the American Transit Association used guidelines that were not identified, but it's obviously the city of New Orleans that what they used as a standard for layover on routes of under 40 minutes and routes of over 40 minutes cycle time. So, yeah, everyone will have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I will, and I think I'll let Michelle kind of pick that up with you as well later. I know you know each other. So, so one from Bill, who unfortunately I think has had to leave, but he'll get this on the recording. In my opinion, we had major negative trends in operator retention and hiring, which leads to rider and community dissatisfaction. Arthur presented a number of nuggets for industry consideration. With post-COVID looming, I hope we can agree we need to spread this gospel. The industry and our economy is at stake. And then congratulated you on the great subject matter. So more of a comment, really. I think emphasizing this is such a crucial issue that we need to resolve. Another's just checking if there's really comments rather than questions. A number of people have mentioned about various tax credits that are available. Previously incarcerated employees, actually kind of some positive stories there. Michelle's also made the comment about seniority in Europe is not about having the greatest runs and weekends off. It's about pay, and basically said, surely that is equivalent across all of other industries. Why doesn't transit have kind of seniority and pay kind of linked?
And if I might add, it's not just linking seniority to pay, but it's also unlinking seniority with all of the goodies, which means low seniority get all the crap. Why does seniority have to be about having the cake and the icing on top of it too? Which the only place you see that is really in transit. If you take, for example, working the night shift on Christmas Eve, when you're in the nursing industry, you take turn doing these shifts. If you talk about working weekends in the nursing or hospital industry, police, firemen and whatnot, they rotate through those bad positions. Why does seniority in transit have to be, I've paid my dues, I've earned my stripes, everything is owed to me, but bid your time? That's really the question. Only transit does that.
Michelle, that's a good comment. I don't think Arthur's really responsible for that, but
no, but it's since we have managers here, it's time to start talking about these things. Seniority is all too often a non-change agent, because whatever we want to do, like the cycling roster that Art presented, cycling, anytime you talk about rostering in an industry where cafeteria style picking means most senior drivers take everything they want, it's a hard push to make the switch, because all they can do as high seniority drivers is lose. So there needs to be a mechanic where that seniority that seniority mentality is shifted. And it has been done in Europe. Took 8 years, mind you, but after 8 years, seniority has been redefined, grandfathered for a few years, to then go towards more of a standard practice of if you've been working in the same job for a long time, you earn a higher pay because you have higher skill. That being said, we are still going to be creating more egalitarian work conditions because, guess what? The youth do not have the patience to bid their time and earn their stripes. So there needs to be a shift in mentality, understanding that we do need to grandfather the seniority privileges that have been earned, but as those senior drivers retire, we can redefine what seniority should be.
Well, and I will say that I addressed that in the comment about finding where on the seniority list that line gets drawn to honor the senior drivers so that nobody moves backwards. And that may be the bottom third, that may be the bottom half. It also requires dealing with the unions. And the last thing I'll say about it is, we're talking about retention and recruitment here. If we continue to do what we have been doing, I think this has shown over at least the last 10 years, exacerbated more recently with COVID, that if we continue to do what we have been doing without rethinking these things, we will be on a downward spiral. And I'll get back to what Merrimack Valley, Massachusetts did. They rethought pay. They rethought recruitment. When I was assigned to Northern Kentucky in the late 70s, there was a sign on the door, on the wall actually, that said, "We'll accept applications on Wednesdays between 10 and 12 noon. People were beating down the door. Now we're trying to beat them up to get them in. So if we don't rethink what we have been doing as an industry, I don't see things improving. So what other comments do we have, Andrew?
Okay, so, well, a couple of people have asked if it would be possible to have a copy of the presentation. I know this is actually part of your training, Arthur, so not sure how feasible that is.
Well, let me suggest this, and there may be some people who joined after Andrew's introduction. Andrew is going to be posting this on the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transportation's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to see the slides again through that YouTube posting.
Yeah, that's fair. So so that should be up for people to see tomorrow. In fact, everybody who's registered will get an email thanking you for attending. We'll ask for some feedback, as well as giving you the link to where you can see this recording. So I'm just looking through all the comments as well. There's a number of people, in fact, quite a number of comments about whether this is refugees, people kind of from Afghanistan looking for relocation. Many of them were drivers and mechanics for the US Army. I think it's the point that you were making, Arthur. There is these unusual kind of more exotic sources of employees out there. Yeah, I think one of the things that you've highlighted, a number of people kind of made reference to it, some of the other kind of levers that can be applied in opening up the job market. Okay, so one additional question here we have is, do you believe that work bonuses are a viable way to hire and retain operators?
I don't know. Different elements motivate different people. That said, money is a good motivator. A very good friend of mine is a retired international magician. He discusses a friend of his, also high in the magic circles, who was hired to teach a very bad magician. Didn't want to do it, but he commented that a certain amount of money can allay my conscience. So money is always a motivator, but it's not the only motivator. Speaking personally, you know, there's a handful of people that I don't care what the money is. I'm not interested in going back to that city. I'm not interested in working there. So money is a motivator. Speaking as an old line up through the ranks guy, I also have a psychological problem in paying extra for someone to do their job, but we need to change what we have been doing somehow. That's why I mentioned thinking outside of the bus, let's say. You know, things like get the family involved in interviews so that the spouse and the children know what's coming. You know, why the parent may be away from home at unusual times. You know, the 529 college plan. Some systems will have an educational program for the driver, you know, college tuition, whatever, but let's get the family involved. I would suggest that in these times, everything needs to be on the table. And I would look toward people who are having some success, parlaying that success. Also, people who have not had success, I'm not going to call it failure, but people who have tried things that have not succeeded in that environment are just as valuable. And that's why in one of my last slides, I mentioned some APTA presentations coming up in the future. I think some of these would be great topics at APTA conferences. My personal hope is that Noah Berger in Massachusetts decides to get out a pen and write an article for Mass Transit or Metro Magazine on what they have been doing. By the way, if you want to read about what he has done, there was a newspaper article in the Boston Globe I believe it was on September the 9th. Oh, September 4th, an article in the Boston Globe. You can Google that article and read about some of his success. By the way, that same article talks about another transit system that has not had success.
I think we'll put a link to that when we actually then send the responses out, Arthur. You just thought, you've obviously done a lot of research yourself on this. You quoted a lot of innovative ideas that different systems are applying. I think some poor practices as well. So maybe that's another avenue that you have for just having it as a training or a conference speech that you could do in the future. And maybe people send them through to you. You could be that voice piece. So we have now reached the 90-minute mark. I would therefore just thank everybody that kind of joined us today. I'm sure, like me, everybody thought it was a really excellent talk. Grateful for that, Arthur. We'll have that available, so please tell your colleagues about it, and you can share the link with them so they can see this presentation. But other than that, I'll just thank everybody for joining us. I hope this gives you a little bit of an insight into the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. If you're interested in joining, please take a look at our website. You can always get in touch with me as well. And maybe see you at a future one as a member. So thank you all very much indeed. Have a great evening and take care.
Thank you.